The desert was still that morning. Too still. Not the gentle stillness of dawn, but the tense, brittle quiet that seems to come before something the earth itself does not want to remember. In the far horizon, the sun spilled over the ruins of Eridu, painting long shadows over stone foundations older than history's own memory. These were not ruins in the modern sense. They were scars. The remains of temples that once rose like stairways to the heavens, crowned with gold and blue lapis lazuli, guarded by beings that ancient scribes dared only call the Anunnaki. For centuries, we have told ourselves these stories were myths, allegories written by wandering shepherds and ambitious priests. But in the dust beneath these crumbled ziggurats, there are things that refuse to stay silent. Over the last decade, archaeologists here have been uncovering fragments, not just of pottery or statues, but of something far older. Items that seem to defy their supposed age, tools carved from metals that shouldn't have existed in 5000 BCE, seals showing star constellations as they would have appeared tens of thousands of years ago. And most disturbing, fragments of tablets that speak not of gods in heaven, but visitors who walked among men. The locals avoid the site after sunset. They tell of a hum that rises from the earth itself, a vibration that rattles tools and shakes lantern flames. The scientists call it seismic activity. The older men in the village call it something else, the pulse of the sleeping lords. But now, something is stirring. Satellite imaging, commissioned under a veil of secrecy, has detected anomalies beneath the sand, structures buried deep below the known ruins, laid out in geometric patterns that align perfectly with star maps of Orion and the Pleiades. Some of these alignments are only visible once every 12,600 years, and that alignment is happening now. For those who have been following the clues, from the lost vaults beneath the Temple of Enki to the forbidden chamber of Uruk, this feels less like coincidence and more like a countdown. And somewhere out there, a door is about to open. The desert wind whistled through the half-buried stones, a sound that was almost like breath, slow, hollow, and old. The team moved deeper into the excavation trench, their boots crunching over gravel that had not been touched by human hands in millennia. The discovery from earlier episodes, the massive sandstone relief from the Temple of Eridu, had not been fully explained to the public. In the official records, it was simply catalogued as ritual depiction, a harmless fragment of an ancient culture. But here, among those who knew the truth, it was understood as something more, a direct link to the Anunnaki narrative that had been quietly emerging. Under the archaeologists' halogen lamps, patterns etched into the wall began to glow faintly. They weren't carved in the usual way. The lines were razor-thin, intersecting at impossible angles, almost like a circuit board. In Episode 6, we had glimpsed similar markings inside the hidden chamber beneath the ziggurat, but those were fractured and weathered. Here they were intact, sharp, as if made yesterday. Dr. Kamal brushed away more dust, revealing a sequence of symbols. They weren't purely Sumerian cuneiform. There was something alien in the way they spiraled outward, their geometry defying the written forms of any known culture. He recognized one symbol immediately, the tri-spiral intersecting with a vertical bar, the same shape found in the obsidian disc recovered from the ruins of Uruk months earlier. That disc, you might recall from Episode 4, had been controversial. It reacted to certain frequencies of sound, emitting a faint vibration, as though it was listening. And now, here was its twin, not as an object, but as an inscription, carved into the very heart of the oldest temple site on Earth. But it wasn't just the symbol that disturbed Dr. Kamal. It was what lay beneath it, a shallow recess in the stone that held a metallic shard, dull and blackened, yet unnaturally smooth to the touch. He didn't need to test it to know it was made from the same impossible alloy as the fragment found in the so-called star burial we examined back in episode 7. The pieces were no longer scattered curiosities. They were fitting together, fragments of a machine, or perhaps a key. And somewhere in the shifting sand above them, the desert wind changed pitch, a long, low hum that seemed to vibrate in sync with the shard in Kamal's hand. It was as if the ground itself was answering back. But there is a deeper layer to this mystery, one that reaches into the very bedrock of Mesopotamian belief and forces us to reconsider whether the Anunnaki were ever gods at all, or something far stranger. Ancient Sumerian inscriptions, when translated without the poetic embellishments added by later scribes, describe the Anunnaki not as omnipotent beings, but as a council, an assembly that convened to make decisions about the fate of humanity. They debated laws, they allocated territories, they established sacred centers like Eridu and Uruk. But why would gods, if truly divine, need councils, debates, or power-sharing agreements? That is the pattern of human politics, not heavenly omniscience. And here is where the threads from earlier episodes begin to knot together. Remember the sealed chambers beneath the Temple of Enki in Eridu, which were said to house gifts from the sky. The cuneiform texts recovered near those ruins spoke of black stones that hum and gold that drinks the sun. In those same records, a recurring phrase appears, me-lam-an-ki, loosely translated as radiance of heaven. Archaeologists once dismissed it as symbolic poetry, but now some researchers are beginning to suspect that it was not metaphorical at all. If the Anunnaki brought advanced tools, artifacts far beyond the capacity of early humans, then the temples may not have been purely religious sites. They may have been installations, energy hubs, repositories, or even command centers. The enormous ziggurats, which we once thought were meant only for rituals, might have been designed to serve multiple purposes: astronomical alignment, storage of these sky gifts, and perhaps communication with whoever or whatever was watching from above. What makes this even more unsettling is the way these temples were defended. Inscriptions tell of guardians, figures with the bodies of men but the heads of lions, bulls, or eagles. Were these purely mythic or coded depictions of something the Sumerians had actually seen? In earlier episodes, we explored the possibility that these hybrid forms were symbolic representations of human-animal traits. But what if they were literal, or at the very least, literal to the Sumerians, depicting beings who looked so unlike ordinary humans that they could only be described as part animal, part man? And then comes the most haunting connection. Several of these guardians, carved into temple walls, clutch what appear to be small, intricate devices. They are never explained in the texts, just shown, always in the hand of the guardian, as though it were both weapon and key. Could these have been the very artifacts stored in the sealed chambers? Could the guardians be the ones entrusted to protect them, even across centuries, even after the temples fell into ruin? If that is true, then the mysteries we uncovered in Eridu, in Uruk, and in the buried vaults of Nippur are not isolated threads. They are fragments of a single tapestry, a story that stretches from the first bricks laid in the first city to the whispered accounts of beings who descended from the sky, altered the fate of humanity, and then vanished. leaving only their temples, their artifacts, and the enigma of the Anunnaki. And yet, one question remains unanswered. If they truly departed, why do so many ancient texts speak not of farewell, but of a return? The storm outside had grown restless, its howling wind scraping against the glass like 1,000 unseen nails. Inside, the room felt heavier, almost as if the very air was holding its breath. Elena sat at the edge of her chair, her eyes locked on the photograph in Detective Raines's hands. It was the same house she had dreamed of, yet in the photo, it stood decades younger. Fresh paint, clean shutters, no signs of decay. But there was something more unsettling. In the upstairs window, faint and almost blurred, a silhouette stood. Tall, motionless, watching. Elena swallowed. That's it. That's the window I kept seeing, she whispered, her voice trembling. Raines studied her expression carefully. The photo was taken in 1978. The house has been abandoned since the early 90s. But that figure? No one's been able to explain it. Before she could respond, a sudden draft swept through the room, scattering the documents on the table. Raines bent to gather them, but Elena froze, her gaze fixed on the single sheet that had slid to her feet. It wasn't a photo this time. It was a police sketch. The face was sharp, almost predatory, with deep-set eyes that seemed to know too much. She didn't recognize him, but the unease in her chest told her she should. Raines looked up at her. We found this in the same file. Witnesses said they saw him leaving the property in 1992. After that, he was never seen again. The storm rumbled above them, and for a brief moment, the lights flickered. In that flicker, Elena thought she saw movement, just behind Raines, like someone slipping quietly out of view. The further the team delved, the more it became clear that these underground galleries were not random. Each chamber was laid out as if following a precise blueprint, their proportions eerily consistent, the angles mathematically perfect. It was as though someone had worked with both the precision of a modern engineer and the artistic sensibility of a master craftsman. Along one sloping corridor, they found carvings of spirals, star maps, and strange, repeating sigils that seemed to link the site to celestial events. When a visiting astrophysicist was shown photographs, she noticed that one star cluster in the carvings matched the exact positioning of a constellation, but not as it appears today. The alignment reflected the night sky from over 12,000 years ago. This dating shook the team. It meant the builders either had astronomical knowledge far ahead of their time, or they were inheriting it from an even older source. In a lower section, partially collapsed, they uncovered an object unlike anything else, a flat stone disc with concentric grooves, each groove inlaid with flecks of a metallic substance that resisted all attempts at identification. The grooves seemed too deliberate to be decorative. One researcher suggested it might have been a kind of ancient star chart, or even a mechanical calendar. But the most unsettling discovery came when they began mapping the entire layout of the site. As the chambers and tunnels were plotted on paper, a chilling image began to emerge. The entire complex formed the unmistakable outline of something not human. A figure with elongated limbs, an oval head, and eyes too large for its face. The question was no longer who built this place, but why they shaped it in the likeness of this being, and what message they intended to leave behind. The photographs were spread across the mahogany table like fragments of a shattered mirror, each image reflecting a different slice of a puzzle too large for one mind to hold. But Detective Hale's gaze kept drifting to a single picture, one so unassuming that to anyone else, it might have seemed irrelevant. It was a faded shot of a man standing near a rusted gate, half his face hidden in a shadow. The background wasn't remarkable, just a stretch of cracked asphalt and a chain-link fence, but Hale could feel the pull of it. Something about the man's posture, the way his shoulders tilted forward, as if burdened by something invisible. The others in the room talked in low murmurs, piecing together timelines, alibis, and statements. Hale wasn't listening, because in his gut, he knew this figure wasn't a stranger. He turned the photograph over. On the back, scrawled in thin, almost trembling handwriting, was a date, and below it, a single word: return. The ink was smudged, as if someone had gripped the paper too tightly, the oils from their skin leaving a ghostly print. Hale's mind flashed back to a night years earlier, a rain-slick alley, a breath in the darkness just behind him, and a voice, soft, almost kind, whispering, "You'll see me again." He had dismissed it then as the paranoia of a younger detective under too much strain, but now it felt like a promise finally being kept. From the far end of the table, Captain Reyes broke the silence. "Hale," she said, sliding a new folder toward him. "You're going to want to see this." Inside were freshly printed surveillance stills from the outskirts of town, and there, in the grainy frame, older now, slower in gait, but unmistakable, was the same man from the old photograph. Only this time, he wasn't standing still. He was walking toward something unseen, vanishing into a stretch of overgrown woods. And the timestamp? Exactly 72 hours ago. Hale leaned back in his chair, his mind a storm of recognition and dread. If the man had returned, what else had come back with him? The council chamber was empty now, save for the echo of voices that had long since faded into the stone. Torchlight flickered across the carved walls, revealing faint patterns, spirals, arcs, and intersecting lines, so delicate they might have been mistaken for cracks at first glance. But Arius knew better. These were deliberate marks, etched centuries earlier, hidden beneath layers of ceremonial plaster. He traced one with his gloved hand, feeling the shallow groove under the marble dust. Every curve told a story, a forgotten geometry pointing to something beneath the Vatican's very foundations. The scent of damp stone mixed with the faint tang of wax from the torches, and the silence pressed in around him, making the room feel more like a tomb than a meeting hall. From the far wall, a whisper of cold air drifted through a seam no wider than a thread. Arius knelt, pressing his ear to the marble. Somewhere beyond that wall, water trickled, slow, rhythmic, patient. It was a sound older than the building itself. Behind him, footsteps. Ilara appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "You found something," she said softly, as though afraid to disturb the air between them. "Not just something," Arius murmured. "The oldest map in this city is etched into these walls, and it's not pointing to a place. It's pointing to a descent." Her brow furrowed. "A descent to what?" He met her eyes, the weight of his discovery pulling the words from his chest like lead. "To where the church buried its first truth and hoped it would never be found again." Somewhere deep below, as if on cue, a low rumble rolled through the stones. Faint, almost imperceptible, yet enough to send dust spiraling down from the ceiling. Ilara stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "Arius, if we follow it, there's no coming back." He didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the spirals, already imagining the path beneath their feet. And in that moment, both of them knew The descent had already begun. The air inside the hidden chamber was thick, not with dust alone, but with the weight of something that didn't belong to this world. Ezra could feel it pressing against his ribs, making every breath a conscious effort. The pale beam from his flashlight swept across walls carved with figures that seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye. He realized with growing unease that the shapes were not entirely human. Some had elongated limbs, others hollow eyes so deep that the darkness within them seemed infinite. But what unsettled him more was the recurring image, a tall figure with a mask-like face, watching from behind jagged pillars. Its outline was neither of stone nor of flesh. It was something in between. In the far corner, a low altar jutted from the floor. Atop it lay an object wrapped in layers of crumbling cloth. As Ezra approached, the air grew colder, as though the very temperature of the chamber resisted his intrusion. The cloth fell away in brittle flakes, revealing a small obsidian disc no larger than a human hand. Its surface was engraved with concentric circles and a spiral that seemed to draw the eye inward, pulling thoughts and focus into its depth. For a moment, Ezra forgot where he was, forgot who he was. He could almost hear faint whispers curling around the edges of his consciousness, urging him to remember. But remember what? A sudden scraping sound snapped him out of the trance. The noise didn't come from above, where the entrance lay, but from behind the altar, inside the wall. Something was moving within the stone. He stepped back, every muscle tense. The whispers grew louder, but now they were no longer in his mind alone. They seeped into the air, carried on a low hum that vibrated through the floor. Ezra's flashlight flickered once, twice, and then plunged him into darkness. In that pitch-black silence, he could swear he heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, approaching. The church bells struck midnight, but their chimes felt wrong, too slow, as if something in the air resisted the sound itself. Evelyn gripped the railing of the belfry, her breath clouding in the cold, her eyes fixed on the square below. Every shadow seemed to stretch, unnaturally, as though the night itself leaned closer to listen. That's when she saw him again. The man in the long coat stood at the far end of the courtyard, hat brim tilted just enough to hide his face. He wasn't moving, wasn't even breathing, or if he was, it was the kind of stillness only the dead could hold. Evelyn didn't blink, afraid he would vanish if she did. But he didn't disappear. Instead, he tilted his head upward, meeting her gaze from a distance no human eyes should have been able to cross. A flash of memory seared her mind. Worn pages from the archivist's journal, the ink scrawled in panic. He waits in the still hours. He cannot follow into light. Below, the man raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, pointing at her. Somewhere deep in the church, something groaned. Wood or stone or something alive. And then, from behind her, the same voice she had heard in the catacombs whispered in her ear, close enough for her skin to prickle. "You've taken too long." The belfry door slammed shut on its own. The hall had grown colder. Not the kind of cold that brushes past you, but the kind that seeps in, layer by layer, until you realize it's no longer the air that's freezing. It's you. Somewhere beyond the narrow archway, a faint sound emerged. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't wind. It was a pattern. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause, 3 beats again. Elias's breathing slowed to match it, almost as if his body had betrayed him, sinking to a rhythm it did not recognize. The light from the old oil lamp trembled in his hand, casting shadows across the faded murals. Murals that, only moments ago, had been silent and still. Now, the painted eyes seemed to follow him. He took a step forward, and the dust beneath his feet did not rise as it should. Instead, it swirled in place as though the air itself was bound by some invisible current. A memory flashed. His father's voice, years ago, warning him of a place where sound and time did not belong to the living. The thought pressed in on him, and yet he knew there was no turning back. Because beyond this archway, whatever waited had been waiting for him long before he had ever set foot here. And as his shadow stretched into the darkness ahead, he realized it was moving differently than he was. The storm has passed, but the silence it leaves behind is louder than any thunder. Some questions have found their answers, yet others have only grown deeper, twisting into places where light dares not follow. And so, the trail doesn't end here. It bends, it waits, it watches, because somewhere in the folds of forgotten places, the truth is still breathing. Stay curious, stay watching, stay with Nexora.